Brian, my friend, don't know how you managed to pull this one off, but I'm excited. We have a very special guest here from across the pond, Mr. Cian Fahey. Fahey. I know no one gets it right, so thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, um, obviously, you're across the pond. You live in Ireland, but you recently just did like a mini United States tour. How long were you here, and where'd you go?
I went. Well, I left on the 9th and I came back on the 26th, I think. So whatever, that's 17 days or whatever it is. I went to Chicago. I went from Chicago to LA or to Vegas. I went from Vegas to LA to Miami, Miami to Chicago, and back home. That's a lot of travel to do in
Yeah.
the space of 2.5 weeks, but it was really good. Mostly to get out for the weather. And then when I left Ireland, Ireland had the best heat wave it's had in 40 years. So I did not time that well.
Well done. So that's a ton of travel to do in 17 days. Then you hit Vegas too. What was your favorite city out of that group?
Well, actually, I should mention it's a ton of travel, and then when your suitcase doesn't get brought on the first flight, it's even worse amount of travel. And then when your suitcase breaks in half on the second flight, you have even more fun. So I had a little bit of a curse going with me. My favorite city, I think it might be Chicago, but I was only in Chicago for like 3 days, so it's not a fair comparison. I love LA. Where I was in LA is downtown LA, which is phenomenal. Except the only thing is it's tough to walk past all the people in the street and stuff like that. It's a bit rough. That's the only thing you kind of feel bad about. But the LA weather is phenomenal. The variety in all the bars and the restaurants and everything else there is phenomenal too.
Nice, man. And well, you weren't in Chicago during January, so maybe that's why it was your favorite. DC gets a bad rep. That's pretty much where Brian and me are from. But gotta say, I think you would have enjoyed it here too. So maybe next time.
Yeah, well, give it a couple of years after the Kirk Cousins era, and I'll be better off going there.
Fair enough. So, what about food, man? Any new things you tried here that stuck out?
Well, the one thing you guys have that we don't have is dumplings. We don't really get them over here because you're closer to Asia, I guess, than we are. But that and empanadas, and I had an argument with one of my friends who said empanadas are just dumplings, but I don't know if that's true. But I was a big fan of the empanadas. Give me empanadas. You know the way they normally give you them as a starter? I would have like 12 of them as my actual main course and be happy out. Just put that on the menu. Put that on the menu.
No, sometimes appetizers are the way to go, right? Get a bunch and fill you up. So you also took a break from Twitter, and I know, and you know, and everyone knows here that when you release your quarterback tiers and rankings, your mentions blow up, and
I don't know. I have the quality filter on. I don't see any of it.
Okay.
That's a smart move.
How liberating was that? As someone, I mean, you have like 50,000 followers. I know a lot goes into that. How weird did it feel to just disconnect? And yeah.
It wasn't really weird. It was the way I've described it to people is like everything in your life gets 10% better because you don't have any reason to look at your phone as much as often. You don't have to think about anything on Twitter at all. Like for me, I'm on Twitter because of my job, because of the role I have to do. So fortunately in the NFL, it's a long off season. So you've got that opportunity to shut it off for a while. And I was just kind of at the point at the draft was on, it was coming to an end. And I was like, I'm not working right now. I don't have any need to be on this website besides making pointless arguments with people or just following people for the sake of following them. So I deactivated it, and when you have a verified account, it gives you 12 months, so you can get back on within 12 months. I knew I was going to come back at some point before the start of the season, and it was just something I wanted to do, and I kind of went on to Instagram then for a while when I was doing the trip, just to document the trip, and that was kind of fun because you put stuff on Instagram and you don't get any comments on Instagram. You put out stuff on Instagram and it's fine, and I kept it mostly for just friends and family before opening it up later on. Twitter is a necessary evil. If I didn't do the job I did, I would be on it, which is probably something that would surprise people because I do tweet a lot, but that's in general, I just kind of go into what I'm doing aggressively. So I do tweet a lot, but I do that. It's 90% the job. It's 10% of whatever other nonsense comes up. And I think a lot of us will be better off without it, but then there's values to it. Like some of my better friends right now I've met through Twitter, so it's a hard one to explain and break down.
Right. Well, hey, welcome back to the wormhole. Glad to have you back, and yeah, it's a necessary evil. I like that description. So, for those that aren't really familiar with you and perhaps kind of what you focus on, do you mind giving a little background as a number one, like how you got into football, right? Because it's obviously not Ireland's sport. And number two, how you got to kind of where you are right now.
That's a long story. This has been explained to me by different people, actually. People telling me that the reason I've kind of stood out in football is because I didn't grow up with it, because I didn't grow up in America being taught the different things that Americans get taught. A lot of that, I suppose the best way to explain that is I don't buy into any value of quarterback wins. Or like that's a basic thing to say, because that's kind of something that's being antiquated now. Most people are growing away from that.
Yeah,
but sure. It's the whole philosophy of it. I've never bought into the idea of the individual player mattering more than the other 10 guys around, or the individual player being represented by the overall offense. And that has led to opinions that infuriate people, and it's led to opinions and analysis and breakdowns that people love. And you kind of either get one or the other. You very rarely get someone who follows me and says, I think it's okay, I don't really care either way. It's always either this guy's an idiot or this guy is doing something that no one else is doing. And I tend to just think I'm just evaluating the sport from, I guess, an Irish perspective, a European perspective maybe, where we don't have any emphasis on stats. Like stats are coming into soccer now, they're coming into rugby now, and it's more about measuring. Like the one that you see a lot over here right now is how often or how much a player runs in a soccer game. So if one player ran 9 kilometers, another guy runs 11 kilometers, that's a useful number over here. But you don't really go much further past that, because our sports are all fluid. There is no there is no line up in this spot, run this route. It's an open field. It's 11 guys moving all over the place, and I think that's kind of shaped how I've evaluated football over the years, I guess.
No, that's healthy.
Think about.
Well, it brings a healthy perspective, and when I read your quarterback tiers and rankings, you mentioned like a traditional way of evaluating things, and kind of trying, because for us, that folks that grew up watching football, whether playing it, watching it, being absorbed by the culture, so many things you kind of know as, or you accept as, this is just the fact, or this is just what it is, without really challenging it, right? And I think you do a great job of starting with the clean slate, like taking the plunger to your head and just removing all that extra abscess bullshit that we kind of get. So I think I didn't want to interrupt you, but I do think a lot of that comes from the idea that people are clinging to a draft evaluation or something like that. But if you even think about that logically, it doesn't hold up, because the argument there is, you want to be right. You want to say that you were right, and you want to say that you said this guy was going to be this. But if you have such a fascination with being right, wouldn't you constantly be changing your opinion on the player? Because you would always want to be reflecting as if you're right. And the one thing for me is I've never cared about being perceived as being right. So if you have, I think one of probably my biggest years, I guess, for my career, or for becoming notorious or whatever, was Nick Foles' year. And then there was Brian Hoyer's year with the Browns. And obviously Nick Foles just won the Super Bowl, but there's no way anyone can argue to me that Nick Foles is a great quarterback. So in his 27-2 season, I was kind of sat there going, hey, look, he's not really the reason he's putting up these numbers. Right. And so for about the 6 months of that season, whatever it is, and then the 6 months of the off season, I'm just getting abuse. But I'm kind of sat there going, this isn't going to work out. And then the next year it doesn't work out. So you come back to a more recent example of that is you've got Derek Carr 2 years ago. Everyone and anyone who's like a mainstream analyst right now, they all said 2 years ago Derek Carr was the future. He's the star of the league. And then last year it was like, no, Derek Carr is awful. He's gone now. He's a waste of time. And it's like, how if you were evaluating it properly in the first place, how has your opinion gone from the very top to the very bottom? He hasn't changed that much. Yeah. So to me, I think that's the big difference there that you were pointing to. Absolutely. And I'm ready to jump into this, man. Your 2017 rankings, awesome. I disagree with a lot of them, right? But I've learned so much just from reading, and I suggest anyone else. We'll post this on our Twitter later, but pre-snaps reads.com. And we'll give you that link here. So let's go by tiers, right? As you break it down. And before we do, I kind of want to know, like, so how do you decide how many tiers you're going to have beforehand? How do you process so much data and compare, quarterback 1 to quarterback 10? Do you go player by player, week by week? Do you have like a rubric you grade each play on? Like, how do you kind of make this whole process organized?
Well, I don't actually organize it beforehand. The first question, there's a lot of questions there. Yeah. So the first question you asked me was, the first question you asked me was, how do I decide how many tiers? Mm-hmm. And how I did that was I started with Aaron Rodgers at number 1, and I said, does another quarterback belong next to Aaron Rodgers, or does he belong close enough to Aaron Rodgers that it should be a tier? And I thought, no, there isn't another quarterback who's on that level. So I got to number 2, and it was Drew Brees, and Drew Brees is with Tom Brady. Yeah, that sounds about right. Drew Brees is with, I don't have it in front of me, I can't remember. So I think there was 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the second tier. Mm-hmm. I think Matt Ryan was probably this tier below. So you had Tom Brady and Drew Brees. They're on, like, at this. I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about career-wise. I know people will freak out because Tom Brady. But Drew Brees and Tom Brady at this point are basically in the same vicinity. They're the same type of quarterback. But then once you get away from the very top, you kind of have this next tier of guys like Matt Ryan. Like, I know this is a controversial one, Dak Prescott, Marcus Mariota, another controversial one, Andrew Luck and Cam Newton. And I think that filled out the third tier. Yeah, that's filled out the third tier. And there you've got really, really, really good quarterbacks, really, really talented quarterbacks. But guys who aren't as polished as Brees and Brady, who aren't going to be in that Rodgers category. So that became the third tier. And you kind of just keep going that way. You get to the guys who are slightly above average, the guys you can throw together. But to me, the tiers and rankings is kind of something they do out of necessity. Again, it's a necessary evil. I feel like I'm saying that a lot right now. But it's something I do just to draw people in. And hopefully, once you draw them in, they look at what's written down. They look at the analysis, the numbers, the evaluation stuff. And then they get a better appreciation of what happened. And I think the Marcus Mariota one kind of stands out the most because people look at it and go, wait, he threw loads of interceptions. And I have the actual stat right there that he was super unlucky.
Right, exactly. And I can't wait to get into that one specifically. And once again, for our listeners, to give context here, this is all based off 2017 performance. It has nothing to do with how Cian feels about their careers or even how they feel going forward. And this is
I should correct again. It is a little bit of projection into this year because Mitchell Trubisky is pretty high up.
Okay. Good to know, because when I mean, sure, there are certain qualities that, like, you can't unteach, and we'll get into it. So first tier, we have Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Matt Ryan. Nothing shocking at all, right? Yeah, with Rodgers, Brady, and Brees, anyone that you ask will give you that as their top quarterback. But what did you see with Matt Ryan? That was a little bit of a surprise to me, mainly because of his surface numbers. The year before, he was coming off an MVP season, right? Falcons went to the Super Bowl. I know we're not factoring these things, but last year it seemed like he had that touchdown regression, but he also threw for 900 yards less on the same amount of pass attempts. He lost Kyle Shanahan. I mean, what did you see from him that put him in the top tier? And how optimistic are you that he can maintain that level of play?
He lost Kyle Shanahan was the reason all those numbers went down pretty much. Well, that and his receivers did not drop many balls at all last year, and his interception numbers were heavily hinged on defenders dropping his passes. So it was kind of this randomness, and he's a great example of kind of regression. It's something I wrote about last week, where I think he had, was it 5 interceptions on 27 interceptable passes in his MVP season? And then he had something like 12 on 14 interceptable passes last year, which is crazy because if you're going through a full season throwing half the number of interceptable passes, throwing the ball to a defender half amount of times, and you're coming away with 5 more interceptions, it's a ridiculous thing because it becomes very hard to say, hey, he's better taking care of the ball this year, but because people don't have the players in front of them, I don't have that number as a mainstream number. But overall, I think losing Kyle Shanahan put him in a position where he had to more consistently make difficult plays. He had to make more kind of pocket passer plays, I guess is the best way to put it in shorthand. He's dropping back. He's got a defender in his face. He's got his blocker being pushed into his lap, and he's got to throw his receiver open into tight coverage because Shanahan isn't there to scheme them to be wide open, running wide open downfield. And he did that phenomenally well. He had one of his best seasons. And this is the funny thing to me. 2 years ago, when I was talking about Matt Ryan and I had him in this category, I think I was doing rankings at the time for Bleacher Report, and I had him 10th or 9th, I think. And that's when he's winning the MVP. And people went crazy and they were telling me I'm just a Matt Ryan hater. And then this year I come back and he's 4th and people are going, wait, what? They don't understand that the reason isn't about whatever they thought it was, the prejudice or whatever that was there.
Right.
It was simply that individual performance and isolating him from his teammates. And one of the big things that happened in that offense was the two running backs they're both phenomenal pass catchers. They're both phenomenal value in the passing game because Devonta Freeman is so versatile, can line up anywhere and run any route basically. And then Tevin Coleman is so explosive. He's like the best vertical receiving back in the league, I think. Obviously you've Gurley and you've Kamara, but he's the best guy at getting downfield and running routes downfield. And he wasn't really used that way and he dropped too many passes. But both of them had a huge number of drops, a huge number of failed receptions that I call them. And that really hurt their production as well and kind of hurt the whole offense's output. And he kind of just had so many more problems around him last year, and he elevated his offensive line. He made everyone better. And it just wasn't shown in the offense as a whole, because you take out Shanahan, you replace him with Sarkisian, you take a wide receiving core that doesn't drop any passes, and they all suddenly start dropping passes, and it becomes a big impact on his numbers. So for me, he went from, in his MVP season, being a guy who was relying on luck to avoid interceptions and wasn't consistently making easier plays, to a guy who was consistently making more difficult plays and became very unlucky with his interceptions.
Right. I mean, it's funny to me, like, right, you talked about 2 years ago, you were low on Matt Ryan after his MVP year, and you get people saying, oh, you hate Matt Ryan. And then you get people coming after this year. It's like, oh, you love Matt Ryan. I don't get it. So you get the same people coming. And then you get also the people, hey, do you even watch the film, bro? And then you've watched like 17,000 plays 3 or 4 different times. So that's always funny to me as it stands out. That's
hilarious. And you touched on interceptable passes, which I'm excited to jump into. As we go to our tier 2 rankings, we have Dak Prescott, Marcus Mariota, Cam Newton, and Phillip Rivers. And with Mariota, he took a statistical dip in a few categories and actually threw more interceptions than touchdowns last year. And that's like surface level, a big no-no. Only like rookie quarterbacks and like Mark Sanchez are supposed to do that, right? But what you pointed out was he actually threw more interceptions than interceptable passes, which to me it's insane, right? Essentially, you're saying that he threw more interceptions than passes that were supposed to be intercepted. And whether that requires tips. But can you tell us a little more about like interceptable passes and maybe some of the nuances that go into saying this is interceptable?
Yeah.
This wasn't?
Well, the first thing before I do that, Marcus Mariota has my favorite stat from last year, where one quarterback, Deshaun Kaiser, pretty much everyone knows that, one quarterback threw more interceptions than him, but 26 quarterbacks threw more interceptable passes than him. So there was guys throwing the ball to defenders 25 times, or 25 guys throwing the ball to defenders more often who didn't have that amount of interceptions. So basically, interceptable passes was created as a concept, started with Josh Freeman during his one positive year in the NFL, because he was getting praised for his ball security, and his primary selling point was, oh, he can be like Alex Smith, who actually I don't think Alex Smith was Alex Smith at that point, but he can be like a guy who takes care of the football and a guy who understands what to do with the ball. And I watched a game. I used to chart games back then for football guys, I think it was. I used to chart those games, and there was a 2-game stretch where he threw one interception and he threw the ball to defenders and had defenders drop the ball straight off their chest, straight off their hands, and it was the ball thrown right to them. It wasn't like a diving interception or anything like that. Right. It was the ball thrown right to them, and he did that 8 times in those 2 games. Wow. So he's coming out with 1 interception, and he could have had 8, and he should have had 8. And I kind of thought to myself, this is something people should be tracking. This is something we should understand. And then at the time, I was like still in college and not really all that into this at that point. I was still doing it as a very part-time thing, so I didn't really have the resources at the time to sit down and create a definition and a way to do it and the time to go through all the plays. But then it happened again with Nick Foles, and it happened again with Brian Hoyer. And I was there sitting down watching Brian Hoyer throw 14 interceptable passes and come away with 2 interceptions and thinking, this is going to implode sooner or later. And eventually it imploded. And then the Nick Foles, same thing happened. And you go through another whatever quarterbacks you can go through over the past 6 or 7 years, and you'll find different examples of this happening. And an interceptable pass is simple, really. a play where the ball should have been intercepted, a play where the quarterback threw the ball in such a way he was relying on the defender to make a mistake for it to not be an interception. So the best example I have for that is if you have a quarterback doing a 3-step drop, stands there, his wide receiver runs a 5-yard out, and the defender runs in, and the defender is behind him, so the wide receiver is open. The ball is supposed to go in front of the wide receiver with a good velocity, so he catches it in his hands, goes out of bounds. If he has that ball and he throws it 2 yards inside the receiver, so it goes to the defender, but the defender claps his hands and the ball bounces off his chest and hits the ground, that's an interceptable pass because it should have been caught. That's the simplest example. There are times where it's kind of a little bit more debatable and where some people would say it's not and some people would say it is. And I tend to try and give the quarterback all the benefit of the doubt that's possible. But maybe the most controversial one is when a quarterback throws the ball up aimlessly and he kind of just throws it up and hopes someone goes and get it. That's an interceptable pass too. Even if it falls on the ground, there isn't a defender within. Like one of the ones I had a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl was Tom Brady during the fourth quarter. That game had, I think, 4 interceptable passes. Wow. And he had one where he just threw the ball away down the sideline. He was trying to throw it over the sideline out of bounds. It went about 5 yards away from, or probably more like 10 yards away from the closest defender. But if the defender had actually recognized that the ball was in the air, he would have been able to just turn around, run underneath it. But he was looking at a receiver, looking at his coverage assignment or whatever it was. And that, again, is still just relying on the defender to avoid punishing your mistake. And that's the whole concept of it. That the idea of you control where you put the ball. You don't control if the defender catches it or not.
Okay.
Right. And so with Mariota specifically, he had this Stone Age offense last year. But now they bring in Matt LaFleur, who's going to utilize more play action. Do you anticipate his numbers improving dramatically with getting Malarkey out of there and inserting LaFleur?
Not dramatically. So here's the thing. We talk a lot about Sean McVay in Los Angeles with the Rams. And you talk a lot of credit. He deserves a lot of credit. He did a lot of things that are a lot better than what Jeff Fisher was doing. But what did they also do? They also brought in Andrew Whitworth. They also brought in John Sullivan. They moved those young guys to the right side of the offensive line. They brought in Gerald Everett to be with Tyler Higbee as their tight end. They brought in Robert Woods. They brought in Cooper Kupp. And they brought in Sammy Watkins. They didn't just change Sean McVay for Jeff Fisher. They changed their whole offense. The Titans did a really good job of getting rid of Malarkey because I didn't think they would once they made the playoffs and won that first game.
Right.
But they also didn't do that much in the offseason. You've still got Richard Matthews, Corey Davis, who we don't really know what he's going to be.
Still hurt.
Yeah, Delaney Walker's coming off his worst season in the NFL, by far his worst season in the NFL. That's including the San Francisco days. And then you've got Taywan Taylor, who I think he's got a small catch radius. I don't think he's good enough to overcome that. And I don't think he's going to be this. I guess Tyreek Hill is probably the comparison people are using for him. I don't think he's even going to be him. But then again, I was lower on Tyreek Hill than other people. So maybe that's just me being wrong and consistently wrong. But I don't think he's going to be the star receiver. I think like Deion Lewis is a great addition, but he's not going to help Mariota that much. The scheme change will have a huge impact on his performances, and he will be more productive this year than last year, and they should avoid all those interceptions because he's not throwing the ball deep all the time. But it's not going to be a hugely explosive offense, I don't think. It's still too slow. The one thing, like, changing that offense is so big because Mariota came into the league as a guy who could manage a pocket, who could throw short, who could throw intermediate, who could throw receivers open, who could work under pressure. Beautiful things that, like, I compared him to Tom Brady. Like, that's how good I felt he was doing all that stuff. And the one thing he couldn't do was throw deep. And Malarkey brought in this offense where he took out all those positive elements of his game and said, let's throw the ball deep all the time. And you're going to have to rely on your blocking to hold up, and you're going to have to rely on these max protections and these vertical, slow developing routes. And it was never going to work. It was very, very obvious that it was never going to work because it's taking, like, it's I don't know what the best comparison is. It's taking a tiny running back and running him up the middle, or throwing sweeps to throwing sweeps to LeGarrette Blount or something like that, and just doing it over and over again. That's never going to work. So this change is huge, and it's going to be really positive in the long term, but maybe not 2018.
That sounds like NFL coaching, by the way.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. Well, before we move on to the next tier, sounds like a silly question to ask, but how much weight do you actually put into turnovers, right? Like, how much could, let's say a great game otherwise, but 3-4 interceptable passes alter like how good you evaluate a performance?
Well, the context is always required, and that's why the QB catalog, which is the huge book I write every year, most of that book is writing about the season and how the season went. for me, it's always about the balance between decision making, or the balance between when you need to be aggressive and when you need to be cautious. If you are chasing a lead, you obviously throwing an interceptable pass while trying to fit the ball into a tight receiver because you need to make a play is not the same as dropping back in the first quarter and throwing the ball straight to a linebacker because you just didn't see him. It's obviously two different things.
Right.
So I always try and take in everything, take all the context of everything, every performance. It's going to be very hard for you to have 4 interceptable passes in a game and for me to come away saying, yeah, you played well. Like, how many quarterbacks have you watched before throw 4 interceptions and say, oh, yeah, he had a good game?
Right.
You're not going to say it. And to me, throwing 4 interceptions is the same as throwing 4 interceptable passes. So I think once you have 2, you can probably, it's probably an easy argument to make. But once you hit 3 and 4, you're probably having major issues. But then you also have guys who are in situations where they're forced to make throws that they shouldn't be making. Mariota was an obvious example, but Phillip Rivers has been the same over recent years because everyone around him gets hurt. And he winds up having to carry this offense, and it's impossible.
Right. Absolutely. Great insight there. So the third tier, we have Alex Smith, Carson Wentz, Tyrod Taylor, Jacoby Brissett, and Jared Goff. Now,
I am shocked that we went straight past Dak Prescott, by the way.
Oh, look, we could talk about that, you know. Let's talk about it.
Go for it.
To be honest, I had to look back at his stats, and I was actually surprised because the media buzz around how he was doing in November and December and made me feel like, this guy was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, but he didn't look that bad. I don't know. Tier 2 seems a little too high for me, but tier 3 or 4, it's not like that outlandish. But yeah, why'd you have him so high?
Well, to me, he got better. Like, so I was one of these people who thought they should have started Romo when he came back as a rookie, and I thought Dak was limiting that offense. And then he came back in year 2 over the first month, and he looked phenomenal. He was doing things that young quarterbacks don't normally do. There's a play I always reference against the Giants in week 1 where they hurried it up, so he's got 25, 26 seconds on the clock. He surveys the defense. He calls a first audible. The defense reacts, changes the alignment, changes again. He goes under center, puts his head back up, realizes, they've changed your alignment. All right, I'm going to call another audible and change the play again. And it leads to this. Actually, it's kind of the perfect capturing of that offense because it leads to Terrence Williams being wide open on a slant over the middle, and he would be going for a touchdown right down the middle of the field, probably a 50-yard touchdown. But Terrence Williams drops the ball. So in that play, you saw that poise of Dak being able to go, hey, I'm going to audible. And then he had a sense of awareness to go, hey, I've got to look at the defense again just to make sure I know I've got the time on the play clock. And he was doing stuff like that all year. But the problem was the offensive line was hurt. The Ezekiel Elliott going out was a big thing because it meant they had to become more of a passing offense, and they did not have the wide receivers for that. They did not have the tight ends for that. Jason Witten couldn't move last year. Des Bryant could barely move, and he was one of the worst receivers in the league catching the ball. And then Terrence Williams is Terrence Williams. So you've got these guys who were anchors in the passing game, and everyone, because we're so quarterback inclined and because we're so crazy with wanting to argue about these things and stuff like that, everyone immediately just went, oh, without Zeke, Dak is terrible. And it's like, no, but like there's 10 other things happening. And then you've got Jason Garrett offense, which is, again, if you want to talk bad coaching in the NFL, that thing's atrocious. I think they had the second most passes in the 1 to 20 yard range last year, which basically says they don't use any screens and they don't scheme guys open deep downfield.
Yeah. And you don't have to get me started on the Cowboys coaching staff. So, but no, I mean, and once again, these are things that I think a lot of people gravitate towards the easiest narrative, right? And when Zeke had that year, he did his rookie year and everything was just in sync. And then, all of a sudden they're kind of dealing with his situation. Of course, it's easy to kind of say, okay, well, without, Zeke, Dak's not good, but it's not like Alfred Morris was a very substantial replacement in that time.
I think the thing with Alfred Morris, though, and this was the thing I observed at the time and kind of anticipated was going to happen too. With Zeke, you have this mismatch option out of the backfield. So when you use play action, like it happened against the Packers. The Packers had this major issue stopping the Cowboys during the rookie season, where they would come out in nickel and the Cowboys would just line up with Witten and use him as a sixth offensive lineman and run right over them. Mm-hmm. And then they'd come out in base to try and stop the run, and they would the Cowboys would either use a screen or use hard play action and get Elliott out in the flat, throw it to him, and he'd run away from the linebacker. So you've got this mismatch thing that Zeke gives you that a guy like Alfred Morris just doesn't give you, and it makes the whole offense run that a little bit better. And when you've got receivers who are kind of complementary pieces who can't be the focal point, that matters a lot more than, let's say, if you were the Buccaneers, where you've got Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson and guys who can create on their own.
Right. And yeah, you talked about them not having basically any screen passes, any deep shots, and a lot of what people don't look at when they're evaluating performances or just looking at stats, they don't take into account how many easy throws it is for a quarterback, how many throws downfield they're making. And that kind of leads into this next tier wild lead, right? Where our boy Carson Wentz, I'm sure, Cian, you have a lot of detractors in your mentions about Carson Wentz, but it kind of leads into making easy throws for your quarterback.
Right. Everyone was all on the Wentz wagon last year. Brian, you actually weren't earlier in the season, and that you kind of sold me on it, right? Which Cian, you obviously your rankings reflect it, and the way you said it was Wentz was more so the quarterback of a great offense more than a great quarterback in 2017. And one thing you pointed out was 7.9% of Wentz's yards were gained on inaccurate throws, and 3 of his touchdowns were also gained on inaccurate throws. So only one quarterback had more than 3 touchdowns on inaccurate throws. That's kind of factoring in, I guess, some luck there. So what's the mark of an inaccurate versus accurate throw? Like if a pass is behind someone, making it tougher to catch, right? But the receiver was led that way so he would avoid a hit or maybe even a pass getting intercepted. Like what is that? How do you judge it based off, precision or more so accuracy?
Yeah, so an example I had a while ago of the guy running the 5-yard out. Now imagine the wide receiver reaches one hand back and pulls it away from the defensive back. Like that's him creating a reception on an accurate throw. I think the best way to describe it is if you have a wide receiver running wide, let's say you do a hard play action and it's a crossing route in behind the linebackers and the safeties have been dragged out deep, and your wide receiver is wide open. So you should throw the ball, let him catch it into his chest or catch it in his hands and keep running for another 40 yards. Right. But instead, you throw the ball and it lands around his ankle, so he's got to dive down and pull the ball up off his ankle. So now he's lying on the ground after his catch, and the linebacker comes back 10 yards and touches him down. And you gain 25 yards, let's say, and it's a completed pass, and it's a catchable ball, and the offense has moved downfield, and you've got a first down. But you did not get the full potential out of what you should have got. You should have got 50 or 60 yards. And this is something you see a lot with Wentz. You saw it a lot with Wentz. You saw it a lot with Case Keenum because he had those 2 phenomenal wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins had it a lot. Ben Roethlisberger had it a lot. These are all guys with top-tier wide receivers. You can tell straight away Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Thielen, and Diggs. And then you had it with Jared Goff, too. He had a lot of that as well because he had guys like Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp especially. That's a guy I'm interested in watching this year because he had a lot of drops but a lot of creative receptions. So he's got an interesting skill set. But you have these plays where the ball is thrown well enough for it to be caught, but it's not a good throw. And you will notice if you look at the numbers, this isn't like a guy completes 200 passes and 150 of them are inaccurate. It's like the worst, I think, is like 11% or something like that, like 10% maybe. That's probably even high. I think it might be 6 or 7%. Like it's not going to happen once every drive. It's going to happen maybe twice a game or 3 times a game at the most. And quarterbacks will go to Mariota, who we talked about a while ago. I think he had something like 11 on the whole year, or maybe even less than that. Aaron Rodgers, I know he only played half a season. I think he only had 1. So like there are guys who can have only 1 inaccurate pass that's caught, and then there are some guys who will have 20. And you have to kind of figure that out to understand who's going to regress the next season and who's going to get better the next season.
Right. And you have 2 of those guys in the same tier in Carson Wentz and Jared Goff. But you have 2 other guys that most people wouldn't expect, Tyrod Taylor, Jacoby Brissett. And in fact, when this article came out and Brissett was ranked ahead of Russell Wilson, Seahawks Twitter nearly melted down. I'm a big fan of Brissett. I think he did a lot with what was given to him, and I mean, tough situation to even step into last year, coming over to the Colts in week 1. I just want your opinion really quickly on where he stands in the league and his performance from last year.
So I did a podcast last year with Jacoby on ESPN, and Jacoby used to every week and say, let's talk about how good Jacoby Brissett is. And I used to laugh at him and say, what are you talking about? Jacoby Brissett's terrible. What are we doing? Because I wasn't watching the Colts that closely. It was during the season. You have to prioritize teams that are relevant and go on podcasts and talk about the actual relevant teams. Right. So I would kind of just be laughing at him. He's only saying it because they both share the name Jacoby. He hasn't a clue what right. So he's just joking. But then I got to February and I was like, oh, it's time to do the QB catalog. It's time to go through all these players. And I was watching Brissett and I was like, hold on a second. This guy is like making phenomenal deep throws. He's one of the best deep passes in the league. And these sacks that everyone's blaming him for taking, there is literally nowhere for him to go, and it's not really his fault.
Right.
And it's similar to the Andrew Luck situation where people were saying, hey, he takes too many sacks, holds the ball too long. It's like, the design of the play is for him to hold the ball that long. It's just that no one else around him are doing their job. Yeah. So I went through this, and I was kind of looking at Brissett, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This can't be this good. So I went back through it again, and I came away with the same thing. It was like Dante Moncrief had a load of drop passes. T.Y. Hilton had a couple of drops as well. Whoever the third receiver there was, but they were kind of ruining too many of his big plays and his phenomenal throws. And I was kind of sat there going, if I just judge this guy based on, hey, he was traded before the start of the season, he shouldn't be this good, or what I'm seeing can't be true, or if I just take what I'm seeing going, this is what's happening, this is how well he's playing, I've got to put him up this high. I can't honestly with myself say Russell Wilson played better than him last year, because Russell Wilson had 30-something interceptable passes and threw 8 interceptable passes in one game while consistently missing wide open deep receivers, whereas Brissett is dropping back and fitting the ball into these tiny windows. And it's like, he's playing the way you think of Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson is playing the way you think of Jacoby Brissett. So I was just like, Brissett's got to go there, and Wilson's got to go beneath him, because that's the way it was last year.
Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're not, you're removing your attachment to any previous. You're saying what you see, man, and that's what.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Seahawks Twitter, like 5 years when Russell Wilson was in the second year, Peyton Manning broke the touchdown record, and one of my biggest articles on Football Outsiders was Russell Wilson deserves to be contending for MVP right now. This is when he wasn't throwing a lot of passes, so people kind of looked down on him. But I was kind of going, he's making phenomenal plays. It doesn't matter how often he's throwing the ball. And of course, Seahawks Twitter then loves you and thinks you're the best person ever. And 2 years later, I'm using exactly the same analysis, exactly the same style of analysis, and I'm now hated. And it's like, nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, just welcome back to the wormhole of Twitter, man.
I'll be gone again soon.
So before we move on from this tier, something that really stood out to me, it's because you have Tyrod Taylor and Alex Smith in the same tier, and from my untrained eye and watching these guys for a few years now, for me, they always kind of struck me as very similar, right? And in a way, like, the way they're skill set and their playing styles are in the right situation, they can look amazing. In a poor situation, they'll have the entire fan base calling for their head, right? Do you find similarities in their games, and do you think they'll benefit from a change of scenery?
So the funny thing is, before 2017, I would have said Tyrod Taylor is Alex Smith, except Tyrod Taylor has a really great deep ball. And then in 2017, Alex Smith was the second best deep passer in the league.
Right.
So now, they are basically the same person. They are the same quarterback. They both have the same flaws. They both stay in the pocket, don't stay in the pocket long enough. They both will get to the top of their drop and try to scramble too often. They're both very conservative. They will avoid throwing into double coverage in situations where they need to. They're both very accurate, but they won't throw over the middle of the field often enough. They both kind of need the defense to be broken down for them, to be shown where to go, misdirection and stuff like that. With that, Andy Reid's great at doing that. They're not going to drop back, survey from right to left, go through different. They will do it at times, but they're not going to do it as the foundation of their game. So those are basically the same quarterbacks. I think Tyrod is going to be great for Cleveland, but Cleveland will probably mess that up because of Cleveland. And Jackson does not seem to know what he's doing, and they're all going to rush Baker Mayfield onto the field. But the Alex Smith one is, I don't really get that. So I don't get it from the point of view that, how is this a long-term win for Washington? They could have put a young quarterback in that situation, a good, really, really good situation, one of the best supporting casts in the league, and grown that situation and grown it and developed a quarterback with those young guys, because they're not under any pressure to win right now. They just let Kirk Cousins go. So if they go 3-13 this year without Alex Smith, if they didn't trade for Alex Smith, they would just go, hey, we traded our quarterback. You got rid of our quarterback. You didn't sign our quarterback. How can you expect us to win? So you bring in Alex Smith, it's kind of a 1 or 2 year gap thing that you're going to do. The big thing for me is I don't think he fits well with Jay Gruden. And Jay Gruden wants you to be that drop back passer like Cousins and figure out where you're going to go with the ball. Smith would prefer for you to do a hard play fake and a misdirection or an option play where he has a very clearly designed where he wants to go with the ball. And you've got these wide receivers who are great at contested catch situations. Paul Richardson's really good, but I'm mostly talking about Josh Doxson. Josh Doxson needs a quarterback who's going to be aggressive and throw into tight coverage, and he'll be phenomenal if he gets one of them. That's on Alex Smith. Alex Smith's very accurate, but he wants you to be open before he throws you the ball.
Right, and you said they could have just dropped in a rookie quarterback in this situation as this is one of the better rookie quarterback classes in a while. I just want to do a quick interjection. Cian, who are you most excited as a rookie quarterback to see this year?
Me, so I had kind of an interesting relationship with this rookie class where I felt like all of the top guys, if they landed in the right situations, could be really good quarterback or really productive, effective quarterbacks. And then there was Josh Allen at the end, who I think is awful. It's going to be awful no matter what you do with him. But you have all those guys, and I think they're all kind of on the same level. So it's not like previous years where I've had Marcus Mariota, who's very much better than everyone else, or you've had Andrew Luck, who's much better than everyone else, or whatever way you want to go through it. The guy I liked most was Mason Rudolph, but he's in the third round, and he's not going to be a starter. He's not going to be someone who the team is going to be invested in and given the time to grow through his mistakes. So that's not someone you can really bank on. I think out of all of those guys, it's probably Sam Darnold. The only real concern I have with him is he threw so many stupid interceptions. But like, you're young, you're in college, you're a quarterback, and Jameis Winston did that as well, and he never stopped doing it, and that's why I don't rate Jameis Winston. But if Darnold can get that part out of his game, everything else is really, really good. People talk about the throwing motion. I don't really care about the throwing motion. The only time I'll care about your throwing motion is if it's leading to fumbles, and maybe that will happen with him. But I don't think it's that bad that it's going to be a problem. He also moves really well in the pocket, so he will feel pressure. You saw that in his first preseason game. I know it's only a preseason game, but you did see him react to pressure and react and move and find the nice place in the pocket to throw the ball. So I'm optimistic about him, but I'm optimistic about all of them. Like Lamar Jackson looked really good this week. Baker Mayfield, I don't think he throws the ball all that well, but he's a very, very good movement in the pocket. He's very quick with his decision making, which can be a positive and a negative. Josh Rosen, I think Josh Rosen is very similar to Matthew Stafford in that his ball placement is going to be consistently okay, but it's not going to be precise. And I'm not sure if he is going to be able to become a really, really accurate NFL passer. Who am I leaving out? Is there someone else? Oh, it's Adam, isn't it? But I don't like to talk about him.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to kind of what I look at as like the average / replacement level tier, your fourth tier. It has 10 quarterbacks in, which is by far the most any tier has. Trubisky, we have Stafford, Big Ben, Kirk Cousins, Nick Foles, Case Keenum, Russell Wilson, Palmer, Manning, and Dalton. Now, we're not paying you enough to break all them down here, and we have such a wide range of quarterbacks here. From the older guys, Ben, Eli, and Palmer, to maybe more polarizing guys like Stafford and Cousins. Some people look at them as franchise quarterbacks. Other people look at them as overrated. But what I want to start with is Russell Wilson, who you had ranked 20th. And surface level numbers look pretty well. He got off to a slow start, but he had a little help. And you mentioned his interceptable passes right there. Constant in quantity, but also egregiously bad in how they came out. And quote unquote, this wasn't the case of the offensive line being the problem. Most of Wilson's problems he created himself, and his 32 interceptable passes gave him one of the worst interceptable pass rates in the league. So with all that said, doesn't having poor offensive line play put Wilson in a tougher spot than others? And isn't it fair to say poor offensive line play can cause a QB to make bad decisions?
Yeah, I actually had him 13th, not 20th. It wasn't that low on him. Yeah, he's 13th, one spot behind Tyrod. Or wait, the wrong one? Wait, I might have the wrong one. Either way, wherever he is, the thing with Wilson was, so you have this offensive line. Obviously, everyone assumes this offensive line was awful and was the reason he was terrible. But you also have a good enough supporting cast, and you also have a line that played better than its actual reputation suggested. He was not sat there and throwing the ball and getting hit every single time he dropped back. He was not always having breakdowns right in front of him where someone was coming unblocked. He wasn't constantly working from condensed pockets. This wasn't like Ryan Tannehill in Miami or Andrew Luck before they added all these guys in Indianapolis. And most of his mistakes were his fault. Having a bad offensive line is something I will give you a lot of credence for. If you have a bad offensive line, it's going to impact you massively. Not just that you're going to take sacks, not just that you're going to have to play under pressure. You're going to have to release the ball at an earlier point than other quarterbacks and throw it anticipation down the field, which is a major, major problem. And you're also going to face teams that only rush 4 and only rush 3 and still get pressure. So you've got to throw into tighter crowds. So if you've got a bad offensive line, it's one of the first things I will give you the benefit of the doubt on. But his offensive line was bad, and it wasn't so bad that he was constantly in those situations. Like, if you go to that Washington game, his interceptable passes aren't because he's under pressure. It's because he's completely misread the defense, or it's because he's thrown a ball that should have been 2 yards outside when it went 2 yards inside. And Russell Wilson has kind of declined that way over the past 2 years. I've wondered at times if he's fully healthy, because he's also developed a little bit of a hitch in his throwing motion where he's dropping the ball further than he used to before, and he did have injuries to his lower body and to his shoulder, I believe, which can lead to big issues for a quarterback, because you need to throw with your feet planted, you need to push your whole body through the ball, you need to have that shoulder intact, obviously. So my thing with Russell Wilson is he's obviously, if you're just talking talent, ability, he's one of the better players in the league. I'm not saying that, like, people say that about black quarterbacks and they're saying it like he's physically gifted or whatever. And I'm not doing that, because he's obviously been very, very good in this league, and he's been very, very good as a passer, not just as a guy who runs. So I think he's someone who can be in the top 2, top 3, top 4 in this league, but he hasn't played like it in recent years. Like, if you go back to these rankings probably 3 or 4 years ago, he's probably 5th or 6th. And that was based on him playing really well, throwing receivers open, taking care of the ball, making not great decisions in the pocket, because he is a guy who will. The funny thing with Wilson is he either gets rid of the ball instantly or it comes out late. There's never anything in between with him. And that can be a very good thing because he can create huge plays, but it'll also be a very frustrating thing because guys will come open after the initial phase of the route and he will miss that. And that's not something like that. That's something guys like Andy Benoit and all these old school guys will get hung up on. I don't care about that. I care about the whole overall quality of performance and skill set. And if that's a minor part of your skill set, that's fine. But it's grown into a bigger part of his skill set in recent years. And once that deep ball went, that was kind of the big thing for me, because he was throwing to Tyler Lockett, Paul Richardson, Doug Baldwin. Jimmy Graham, they use like a possession receiver rather than a deep threat. But when he went deep, he's another guy who creates separation and offers a big catch radius. Those guys were open. He was not hitting them. So that's different to being Cam Newton throwing to Russell Shepard and whoever else was in that offense where they couldn't create any separation. And you've got to fit the ball into a window that's smaller than the ball itself. Mm-hmm. Russell Wilson was throwing into like 10 yards of space, just had to put the ball out in front of his receiver, and way too often the ball either floated through the air, which is weird for him because he used to have some of the highest velocity in the league, either floated through the air or just was completely off target. And that just, to me, it was a huge problem last year that needs to change and needs to get better and needs to get back to who he was earlier in his career. And I hope he does, because he's one of my favorite players to watch when he's at his best, but he just hasn't been there.
Right. And I don't know if it's injuries or whatever it was, but Waleed, I mean,
beginning of last year, we were pretty stunned, man, looking at some of his film.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say it's because of this, but he did get married and start having sex. Yeah. I don't know if that had anything to do with this, so...
Yeah, maybe. So one thing I want to ask you here, I've been a big Kirk Cousins guy. I'm kind of a Redskins fan. It's been tough. It's been real tough recently. And I think when I look at this tier, I had always looked at both Kirk Cousins and Matt Stafford as guys that I thought were legitimate franchise quarterbacks that not like, or have underrated mobility and like improv skills, but also great arms and like above the shoulders were great, right? But it seems like they both struggle with accuracy. And from your perspective here, if you had to pick one going forward, who would you take, and what do you think it is about both of these guys that like the common folk are missing? Because most people, they're polarizing, but most people still look at them as hands down franchise quarterbacks. I don't think you feel the same about them though.
Between Stafford and Cousins, was it?
Yeah.
So they're different style of quarterbacks. Matt Stafford is more of an athlete, more of someone who's going to extend plays. He's better moving in the pocket. He can throw under pressure. Cousins is similar to what we were just talking about with Russell Wilson, is catch and release a lot. He wants to get rid of the ball instantly. That pre-snap read is huge to him, similar to Andy Dalton really a lot. If I had to choose between one or the other, I guess it kind of depends. It probably depends on what kind of offense I have, but I guess I would probably go with Cousins. My big thing with him last year was I think he had 29 interceptable passes, and just they were constantly being dropped. And my other issue with him is he has limited arm strength, in my view. I know some people will argue that and say that's not the case. But if you get him off of his foundation, or if you ask him to throw from the far hash to outside the numbers, it's a major challenge for him. Whereas Stafford is completely different. Stafford can throw everything to anywhere at any point from any foundation. But Stafford, I think Stafford's problem is just general accuracy. He is the guy who kind of, if you want to say interceptable passes is a waste of time and none of this matters, he is the guy you should point to, because every single year he comes out with awful interceptable pass numbers and has decent interceptions. And my theory on it is he throws the ball so hard that defenders are just, they have very little chance of catching it. Yeah. And that might be too simplistic a theory. It might be just me trying to point out that these numbers are better than they are because I'm biased in that sense. But it's a difficult one for me, because I guess this kind of comes down to, I know what to expect more from Cousins and snap to snap. He's not going to create as much as Stafford outside of structure, but I would rather have the quarterback where I know it. When let's put it this way: when the level of quarterback is similar, I would rather have the guy who I know more what he's more likely to do each play, because I can build a specific offense around that. People say that sentence without the caveat of when they're close together in ability, because that's a really important part. Because if you have a different style of quarterback who's like clearly much better than the other guy, then you take that guy and build the right offense around him. But when you have two guys who are close together and you've got to build whatever offense you're going to build regardless, I will go with the guy who's a little bit more predictable.
Mm-hmm. And last thing before we move on to the fifth tier, and we're not going to bother with the sixth and seventh, but what's your outlook for Kirk Cousins now that he has Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen and Rudolph, and has a defense and probably a running game? Like, do you think his trajectory, like, have we seen the best of him? Could he improve? Because what I've seen as a Skins fan was the last 2 years, like, he really developed his ability to improvise and run, which I don't know, like, maybe I'm wrong. I could be biased. Like I said, I really like this guy.
That's a really annoying thing too, isn't it? He's a really nice guy.
Yeah,
such a nice guy. Yeah.
So where do you see his trajectory in Minnesota now? Is it kind of more the same, or like better situation and maybe like an MVP by the NFL standards kind of potential?
Well, if you're the quarterback of a winning team and you have big numbers, you could be in that MVP conversation. That's all that MVP conversation is.
That's a fact. Yeah. That's all it is. Right.
The thing is, like, Cousins has made a brilliant decision. Obviously, you're getting a guaranteed contract and huge money, so that's a big brilliant decision from the start. But he's made a brilliant decision in the sense that he has gone to another team that is stacked. Like, his teams in Washington were stacked with Jordan Reed, with Garcon and Jackson and the slot receiver whose name is evading me right now for some reason. Crowder, yeah. So you've got all these guys.
Vernon Davis, right?
Yeah, as a backup tight end, that's crazy. Like, he was terrible elsewhere, which is weird. So Jake Gruden's also a really good coach, but in Minnesota, what he's going to get now, he's got the best starting receiver tandem in the NFL. That's obvious. He doesn't have as good a third receiver, and he doesn't have as good a tight end. And he definitely does not have as good a pass blocking offensive line, but he will have a better running game. So I think it's going to be very similar. He might be less productive in the sense that he won't have to throw the ball as often, and he won't have the gaudy numbers he's had over the past couple of years. But I think he's going to have a similar situation where there are receivers who can adjust to his passes. There are receivers who can create huge separation like they did for Case Keenum. Again, my big concern, I'm not kind of going back to this all the time, but it is something that I do put a lot of weight in. My big concern is that regression on his interceptions. If he comes out there and throws another 25 interceptable passes, the odds over the years suggest that he is going to end up with 20 interceptions rather than whatever smaller number he has. So for the Vikings can kind of put him in a position where they can say, we don't need you to win games. We've got this dominant defense and we've got this running game and receivers who are going to be great. But they could have done that with Case Keenum too. They did last year until the end in the playoffs, when it wasn't really Keenum's fault, but it was like part of that being dismantled was having a quarterback who couldn't come in and say, hey, I'm going to elevate everyone around us and make plays right now. So that was part of it. It wasn't the issue. The issue was obviously the defense didn't turn up and everything else went wrong pretty much that could go wrong. But it feels to me like they've spent an extra $20 million to get a very similar level of quarterback, a different style of quarterback, but someone who's not making them more of a Super Bowl contender than they already were. But none of this will matter if they win one more or win 2 more games than they won last year, which is very possible because like you've added Sheldon Richardson to the defense and you've added another cornerback in the draft and you've got this roster that is just phenomenally talented. And obviously we say that now and they might get hurt and have so many injuries and different things might happen over the course of the year. But if everyone on paper stays as close to they are on paper, that team will be a playoff team and they'll be probably a very successful playoff team to the point that you would expect them to be close to the NFC Championship. And if they do that, no one's going to probably point back to Kirk Cousins and say, hey, he's the reason we lost this year. Probably except for me. I'll probably be the only one doing it. but no one's going to turn on the Vikings and say that they should have done something else because they didn't really have that many options. Like I would have argued for Teddy Bridgewater, but their point was, hey, his medical is so bad, we can't re-sign him. And I can't argue with that because I don't have his medical. And as someone who's had bad knee injuries, I know how bad those can be even after they're fixed. So you can't really blame them for not going all in on Bridgewater. Maybe Bradford might have made sense, but he hasn't stayed healthy either. So they didn't really have many options. So you can't blame them. And I also think it makes sense to go for a veteran in their eyes, and I can understand that. Again, the predictability of what you're getting in his skill set.
Sure thing, yeah. Wow, that's a juicy tier 4 there. And to the final tier we'll cover, we have Winston, Watson, and Carr. Now, I think most folks are on the same page with Winston and Carr. Like, they've underachieved. Their weaknesses are kind of glaring. Watson, on the other hand, was like an electrifying rookie who took the league by storm. And despite getting hurt, there's a lot of optimism and expectation with him. An excerpt from your piece on Watson that stuck out to me was the NFL needs more quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson. He's bucked the conservative, fear-based decision-making trend that has taken over the modern NFL. He drops back and he's thinking touchdown on every throw. Why do you think this sort of high-risk, high-reward mindset is something more quarterbacks need to adapt? Like when I think of this sort of label, I think of guys like Brett Favre and maybe Jay Cutler or Stafford, right? Like the gunslinging mentality. Even Winston, right? Despite his deep accuracy problems. I guess, can you elaborate what the ideal mindset for a QB in your eyes would be? And where do you draw the line? Like what's too aggressive? What's too conservative? What makes someone an aggressive quarterback? Is it deep passes, throws in tight windows, all those things?
Well, the NFL needs Watson and more like him just for the fun element of it. All their quarterbacks are way too similar right now. Everyone wants to throw the ball 3 yards downfield and have a receiver run after the catch. Watson came in and was just like, I'm throwing this ball deep, and we're going to throw this ball deep, and we're going to keep throwing this ball deep. And I think it was like 17% of his passes or something went deep last year, and the next quarterback was at 15%, and everyone else is at 11 and 12%. So I love his mindset. But it's not a great mindset to have if you want to build an efficient offense. So I can kind of separate those two things. My big thing with Watson was he was not very accurate, and he relied on his receivers to adjust too much. He didn't really have an interceptable pass problem, and he didn't really have major issues in terms of, like, for a rookie, there isn't really anything there where I'm saying, oh, he's got no chance of developing pass. Like with Derek Carr during his rookie season, his footwork just was awful, and his reaction to pressure was awful, and that's not something that gets better. That's not the case with Deshaun Watson. He's just got to develop. So he's in this tier right now because it's for 2018, because he's coming off an ACL tear and he didn't really play that well as a rookie. He was actually quite similar to Deshaun Kaiser. Kaiser was a lot less lucky, and he had a lot worse supporting cast. Rashard Higgins is not doing what DeAndre Hopkins does. So I went through all that and I thought, he's really not good right now, but that doesn't mean he's going to be bad forever. I think he has a skill set that he can develop on, that he can become a quality player. And the thing he needs, so we're going to find out pretty quickly if Bill O'Brien wants to run the offense he ran last year all the time, or if he wants to try and go back to the stupid stuff he did with Brock Osweiler and Savage and all that, where he stressed the quarterback out way too much. So it's kind of concerning to me that O'Brien got Watson and suddenly realized, I need to give my quarterback easier plays. It's like, does he think Deshaun Watson is a worse passer than Osweiler? Because he gave Osweiler the straight dropbacks, the difficult reads, the progression, go from side to side, figure it out for yourself and throw the ball into tight windows. And then Watson came in and he was like, oh, wait, I need to define things for him. I need to use max protection, hard play fakes, and have route combinations that work off each other. And I'm sat there going, why would you do this for Deshaun Watson if you just drafted him in the first round, but you wouldn't do it for the other guys who obviously suck? So
he probably thought he was getting Peyton Manning's mind with Osweiler, right?
Yeah.
He probably learned some things from Peyton.
Well, so hopefully O'Brien keeps running that offense where it's helping the quarterback and it's actually setting the quarterback up for success, because that's another team with an offensive line that's going to be problematic if you ask your quarterback to drop back 20 and 25 times. He's going to get hit a lot, and there's going to be a lot of interceptions and fumbles and sacks. So if he keeps doing that with Watson, and Watson's able to do it coming off his injury, he's going to move up this board pretty quickly, I would think, presuming his accuracy gets better. But if he gets put back in the offense he ran like the first week against the Bengals when he was thrown in on a short week and they just ran the same offense they'd run before, that's going to be ugly. Yeah, I don't think he'll overcome that or develop in that. But if he stays in the other offense, I think he can develop and become quite a good player.
There you go. Have you given up on Carr and Winston? Like I personally have. I feel like I know who they are, right? And I like, if I'm a football team and I have an opportunity to get them, I'm not touching him. Or do you think they can still develop? Like it's always weird, right? Back in the day, it'd be like you'd give rookie or young quarterbacks time, but now it's like 2-3 years, and we got to come to a verdict.
Well, Derek Carr is not that young anymore. He's been around for a while, and he has that one flaw that I don't think gets better. You don't get better at reacting to pressure because it's more instinctual than anything. So we talked about Bridgewater. Bridgewater blew up his knee, came back and played in this preseason game this week, and he straight away is doing what he's always done. Pressure comes, he reacts, sets his feet, delivers the ball, stands there and takes a hit. Carr, for as long as he's been in the NFL, will not do that. He does not react to pressure. When he sees pressure, he just throws the ball. When he sees pressure, he does not step into his throws. He throws the ball with his feet in the air, jumping backwards or diving backwards. And that's a major issue for accuracy. He's been lucky that he's been behind one of the best offensive lines in the league so far, and that's how he got his contract. If he was playing in a normal situation behind a normal offensive line, he would never have made it to that contract. And I don't think he's going to get any better. Winston, like, if I had to kind of grade these, I would say Winston I'm more optimistic about. But I've also seen Winston play so much to this point without getting better that it's so hard to turn around and say, hey, this is going to get better. He has mechanical issues as well. His footwork can be a nightmare and his throwing motion can be all over the place. It's why he kind of has that weird look. Just when you watch him, it doesn't look like all the other quarterbacks. It's like the hands are kind of flailing everywhere and the ball's going that way. And it's why he has these fumble plays where he goes backwards and the ball pops in the air and he kind of falling backwards, throwing straight up in the air. He has had Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson. He had the 2 tight ends last year, O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. Cameron Brate's fantastic player. Those are all guys who can get open, who have massive catch radiuses. And Winston still can't hit them. He can't get the ball accurately to them. It's like you have to, if you can't get the ball to them, who are you going to get it to? And then you throw in the fact that he throws the ball to defenders all the time. Again, massive interceptable pass numbers. And it's just, I just don't see it. The big problem for him too is he's in an offense right now that he needs to be in. The best thing that Winston does is throw intermediate passes. He tries to throw every single one with anticipation, which is a problem because that leads to throwing the ball to defenders and rushing throws and missing windows. If he just let the plays breathe a little bit more, he'd have a better accuracy rate. But the big problem for him is he's in his offense right now that's perfect for him. The 4 verts, the intermediate heavy, pushing the ball downfield, using play action. Sometimes you keep the tight end in. You're very rarely using short plays, quick throws, or spreading the field out. So normally if you have a quarterback who is really, really struggling in a scheme or an offense, like Mariota, like we were talking about, move him to a different one, he might be better. If you move him to like a quick passing game with that elongated release and slow throwing motion and where everything's kind of very deliberate, that's not going to work. Guys are going to jump his passes all day long. If you move him to, actually there's no other offense really to kind of move him to, because he's not athletic. You're not going to go to like a read option heavy running game where he's going to run downfield all the time. So I can't really see the path to him being more productive or being a better player. Maybe he's still young enough, and maybe all the other stuff in his life goes away, the off-field stuff that distracts from what he's doing. Maybe he gets better. It's not something I would ever bet on.
Yeah, that's fair. It's kind of like the Kirk Cousins. He's so nice, and then Winston. People, the media always gives him credit for being a fiery leader, and I think that plays a lot into the perception of how he plays. Also,
he'll get that second contract from the Bucs. They'll keep paying him.
Oh, for sure.
Wow.
And also real quick, you mentioned Teddy Bridgewater, and I thought he looked great in his first game back. And it was funny to me, like one of the first couple of plays, they just left an unblocked rusher, and Teddy Bridgewater was like, I dealt with this all the time in Minnesota, easy completion, like no big deal. So it was good to see him back and healthy though.
Man, I have a gif of Bridgewater somewhere where they have, I think it's 8 players in protection. He gets to the top of his drop and 2 defenders hit him off a 4-man rush. It's like you have 8 guys here. Whatever about one getting through. How did two of them get through?
It's incredible.
Hilarious. I'll need to see that one. So I got this number, 17,488. That's how many pass attempts there were in the NFL last year. You've seen them all a handful of times, right? And for the more casual viewer out there that doesn't get the like all 22 view or doesn't retroactively view film, if you could give them one nugget on like how they watch the quarterback position on Sundays, right? Maybe just to give them a different perspective, like whether it's mechanics or something about footwork, or like what would you say to like a casual football fan, like to kind of focus in on, and that will give him maybe even better insight as to how good a quarterback is?
Well, the most important thing is the cleanliness of the pocket. If you have a guy who, like Andy Dalton for years, had great offensive line, Andrew Whitworth was there, and everyone else Andrew Smith was, before Andrew Smith became a bad player, was at right tackle, and they had Zeitler at right guard and Bowling at left guard, and well, they never really had a great center for a few years, but they had an offensive line that could give him great pockets. That year he was getting MVP talk before he got hurt. He was in that Hugh Jackson offense where it was get rid of the ball quickly, and if you held it, you had lots of time and space in the pocket. So when you watch one quarterback, and let's say you're focusing on the quarterback, just something you want to do, watch a guy who, like Ryan Tannehill, and look when he gets to the top of his drop, when he stops moving backwards, which is what that is. If you're a casual fan, you might not know these terms or whatever. Yeah. But when he stops moving backwards after initially getting the ball, look how many bodies are close to him. Look how many, even his own players, if his blockers are in his lap. And then compare it to someone like Carson Wentz in Philadelphia or someone like Derek Carr in Oakland over recent years. And see when he gets to the top of his drop and see how many bodies are close to him. So if you have all this time and space, you can stand there and you can wait for your receivers to come open. You don't have to throw the ball before the receiver comes open. You don't have to throw into tight coverages because they're getting pressure with a four-man rush. You can literally sit there, pick and choose where you want to go with the ball. And if you miss a read in that offense, in that type of offense, it's fine because you just hold the ball and turn around and look for a different receiver. Whereas if you are in an offense that can't protect you and you can't get time in the pocket and there's bodies around you instantly, your first read better be right and you better be able to throw the ball before you're meant to throw it and do it with accuracy. And that's exceptionally difficult. So if you're watching, if you just want to see one thing and you just want to see, hey, is my quarterback good under pressure, or if he's bad under pressure? Every quarterback's worse under pressure. Most quarterbacks it's the quarterbacks who face more pressure are generally perceived as being bad quarterbacks. That's kind of the biggest determining factor, I guess. But the other thing, one of the things I was watching today, look at how many different types of plays the offense runs. And you don't have to know what they're called. You don't have to know what they are. You can sit there and recognize, hey, this guy moved that way, doesn't normally move that way, move this way, move that way. Some teams will have guys line up in the same spots all the time and do the same movement all the time. And that's predictable. So defenses can jump routes and understand what's going to happen. That's the Cowboys offense I'm talking about right now. So they can do all of this, and they know what's coming, so it's easier for them to take advantage of the quarterback. Whereas you have a guy like Sean McVay who is purposely snapping the ball at different times in the play clock and running screens when everyone expects him to run the ball, or throwing deep off of design shot plays. And it's completely different, the two offenses, when you put them side by side.
Yeah, that's
awesome stuff, man.
That's something a lot of fans don't really look at, is play designs and how it makes the life of the quarterback much easier. So I think that's a great takeaway.
Well, it makes sense to because it's like a lot of the things that has been said to me as well. We talked earlier, kind of bring it full circle, is the idea that I didn't grow up with an NFL coach as a father or whatever like that, or just a football coach as a father. So I never knew any of these terms, and I've just picked them up over the years. So I will write and talk in such a way that anyone can understand it. Whereas you have people who are great at their jobs. A guy like Matt Bowen is brilliant at what he does, but he's going to use 20 terms in one tweet that you don't understand. And you'll be sat there going, trying to figure it out. And a lot of time, I don't understand it. But I can tell you when I see it on the screen, I can tell you what is actually happening and the concept behind it. So if you're sat at home and you're trying to follow play calling, or you're trying to follow what's happening, and you don't have labels for any of these movements or any of these things that's happening, it's extremely difficult. But just kind of note, if you're trying to get into the business, or if you're just trying to do football analysis on your own, just note these things down and try and remember it. And if you have to put it in your own words, that's fine. It just means that you'll have to explain it sometimes. But that's fine, because everyone has to do that.
Man, awesome stuff, man. It's going to be tough getting our listeners to listen to just Brian and me next week. So, man, this is fun. So you're back on Twitter. Where can our followers kind of find you elsewhere?
Well, at the moment, we're just doing Patreon stuff and kind of putting stuff on there. We're at the end. There's going to be stuff happening at the end of the week. I can't really talk about it yet, but that's going to be my next destination, I guess.
You don't want to break news on our podcast?
I do not.
No, we appreciate you coming on, though. Yeah, this was a great conversation.
This is awesome, man. Well, hey, best of luck. Football's here, and really appreciate you diving into your quarterback tiers, and hopefully we can have you on at some point. But yeah, best of luck. We got our eyes open for your next move.
Football's still a month away, though.
That's fair.
Football's not here yet.
That's fair.
This is my pet peeve. Football is here every second week for the last month.
Yeah. We've said it at least in the last 5-6 like podcasts or appearances. So
it's like when the NFC Championship and AFC Championship games finish, and it's time for the Super Bowl. It's like, wait, when's the Super Bowl? 2 weeks?
Yeah, we still got 2 weeks.
And you're just sitting around doing nothing for 2 weeks.
Oh man, awesome. All righty. Well, thank you all for joining us here, and thank you, Cian. This has been real fun. Hopefully we get you back on, and sayonara.
Hey, good luck this season, Cian.
Thanks, man.
All right, take care.